Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Matthew. And it is Luthye. It's like Lucy with a lisp. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today. We're talking about ethics. And so I thought that it would be a good place to start, just to get on the same page about, what we mean when we say ethics. Ethics is a piece of philosophy, but it's one that affects our lives. A lot of philosophy conversations could take place in ivory towers, with professors, but ethics is something that actually affects our lives and how we live them. So, a simple definition is the study of the moral ought. Essentially, how do we know what the right thing to do is? How do we know what the wrong thing to do is? So obviously, clear-cut, easy answers, or not. I don't know if you've noticed, but the culture right now, the state of things in the United States, sometimes conversations get pretty heated when you're talking about what's right and what's wrong. And I think the reason that happens is because our ethics, that piece of us that says, well, what's right and what's wrong, they're based on our values, and our values are part of what makes us who we are. So I'm going to ask you, for a minute, just to think about what your core values are. What are the deep-seated values that you have that do shape who you are? These are a few, not, they're not the only ones, but they are what I can fit on this screen. So, think about what on this list stands out to you. What are the values that that you say, well, yeah, that is a non-negotiable for me. And then I want you to think about what values got you into this work. If you're here at this conference, then you're at least interested in anti-human trafficking work, and probably are doing at least volunteer work, if not, fully immersed in this work. And so think about the values that got you here. Those are the things that are going to shape the decisions that you make as you're doing this work. So to make ethical decisions in our anti-trafficking efforts, there are three things that we need to examine: our motivation, our message, and our method. Motivation. When I worked with the Salvation Army, I ran a 24/7 emergency and transitional housing program for adult survivors of both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, 18 and up. I mean, we served women from 18 all the way up to 64. And our staff also ranged in ages, but there was a young woman I worked with named Cammie. And I really liked working with some younger staff because they taught me things and made me think about things in a way that was fresh. And she used the phrase, the big why. What is the big why of the reason that you got into this work, the reason that you're interested in this work? What is the big why for the organizations that you're with? So that's your motivation, the big why. And I start with this image because sometimes, whether we mean to or not, we can kind of easily slide into that hero mode, that sense of there's something wrong. This is a huge injustice. I can't believe this is happening, and I need to fix it. And then I would encourage all of us to take that off, lay it aside, put it in a box, put it in a shelf, whatever you need to do, just to take that cape off. I'm going to give you a few homework assignments for after this workshop. So if you want to jot this down, there's a woman, and I'm going to look up the spelling of her name. Her name is Becky Bullard, Bullard. She wrote an article a few years ago called "Take Off the Cape," and I really would encourage you to go look that up when you're done with the conference, because she makes some really great points. What she says is the problem with the superhero cape is we wind up actually doing more harm than good. So if we make a promise to somebody to say, I can save you, not only is that a promise that we just can't make good on, sometimes people wind up walking away because the work is really, really hard. And it's not like, people coming out of highly traumatic situations, and not just situations that are short term. Sometimes this is the end of a lifetime of traumatic events that led from one to the other. And so if our expectation is that somebody's gonna embrace us and hug us and say thank you so much for all that you're doing, well, that may not happen, and often it won't. And sometimes instead of a thank you, you're going to get some choice words that are very much the opposite of thank you. And even when sometimes people are open to that warm hug is not going to fix it all. I'm going to show you a video, and you might have seen this, but I want you to think about, as you watch this video, think about it in terms of motivation. Let's see. Well, is it not going to let me play? Oh man, maybe it's not going to let me play. Let's see. Is our tech person able to help me with this?
I think you might have to escape and then try to press it again.
Escape, okay. Let me try that. Nope, but let me try this. Let's see if I can pull it up. Let's see, does this work? Can you see this? Are you able to see this?
No, we still see the screen
Oh, goodness.
from the presentation.
All right. Well, let's see, let me pull up. Oh, I see a person in a pool with a chair, right. Let's see if this, what about now?
No, I think it's still just the person with the pool in the chair.
Okay. All right. Here's what I'm going to do then. I'm going to give you some links. So this will be part of your homework. And some of you might have seen this. Share the link. Yes, I will share the link in the chat. Some of you might have seen this, but basically the girl is, means well, she wants to save this squirrel, and she's in the pool, she's finding a chair, she's finding something that she can she can pull it out with. And she keeps saying, I'm going to save you. Let me save you. And she gets the squirrel out. And then, as you can see in this picture, the squirrel basically jumps on her face, and she's, screaming and running away. And I think, the encouragement obviously is don't be the squirrel girl, but even when we don't use the words, I'm going to save you, sometimes the words that we use, sometimes they show an underlying motivation that we might not really even be aware of. And I'm going to pull up some phrases that I found online on various websites connected with anti-trafficking organizations. And one of them is really just copy and pasted, the first one. The other ones I changed a little bit because I'm really not about calling out specific organizations, to shame or embarrass. But I do think sometimes when we mean well, we wind up using language that can be harmful. The first one, I think, it would take quite some time, I think, to unpack this, but this is a phrase I found on an organization's website. And aside from the language, which I think we can all agree this is not language that we would want to use, I'm fascinated by, Debbie says, I find that my donors want me to be the squirrel girl. Yeah, so let's come up with some language that we can use when we talk to our donors. But I'm fascinated by what the motivation here is. Is it because I do the real work and it's gritty and, I get my hands dirty? Is it because we read something in the New Testament about, Jesus being scorned for, hanging out with women who were being prostituted, and so we want to be like Jesus? I don't know. I'm horrified and fascinated all at the same time. We bring freedom to the oppressed. We're all about freedom, and certainly I think we could agree that oppression is not a good thing. But let's keep moving, and we'll circle back to that. You can set them free is language that shows up sometimes. We rescue children who are sex slaves. Well, I think we can all agree that that's a horrifying image, and we would all want to do something about that. But I think we need to look at the motivation. 13 years ago, I was living and working in Haiti, and don't check my math on this, but there was an earthquake in the beginning of 2010. I was in Miami at the time, and was needing to get back into Haiti. It took a few days to get in there, because the airport was affected by the earthquake. And so the big planes couldn't get in and out. There were a lot of people with private planes who were sort of donating the use of their time. And so I got in on a plane, I think owned by a race car driver, and the airport was really, really small. The private plane airport was really small. It was, picture just this big room with a bunch of white plastic chairs in it. I got back in. I'd been there about 9 days, and was then flying out to go back to Miami. And I'm sitting there and I'm exhausted. And I've seen a lot that was hard. And this woman sits next to me and is sort of the opposite of my exhaustion. She is peppy and kind of bouncing in her seat. And she looks at me, and, I guess she caught my eye, and she, so she looked at me. She needed to say this to somebody. And she said these words: "Wasn't that great?" And I think I didn't say anything. I think I just kind of looked at her, because all I could think was, well, no, it wasn't great. It's been pretty awful, and lots of people died, and people that I really care about were affected by this, and they lost people that they loved. But because I didn't say anything, she kept talking. And, she said, I've been to disasters all over the world. I'm a nurse and I've been all over the world. And this was by far the most exciting. And I think I probably tried to just stop having eye contact with her for the rest of the, time until the plane came. But I think sometimes adrenaline takes over. And I think for all of us in this work, if we can stop for a minute and try to recognize those times when adrenaline takes over, and to remind ourselves that that's not what this is about. The other piece with those statements in the websites, whether they were mission statements or taglines, is who's the main character? Who is the main character in the stories that we're telling? If we say we rescue victims and restore their lives, who's the main character? Well, we are. The organization is, or the donor is. Who is, doing the restoring? Well, it's the donor, or it's the organization. And so what we've done is we've taken individuals who are in a trafficking situation, who are being controlled by a criminal, and now they're being controlled in a different way by a do-gooder. So what's the difference between we rescue victims and restore their lives? With, we're empowering survivors to restore their freedom, or we're empowering survivors to take control of their own lives. We're sort of standing back or walking alongside while they do the hard work. Okay, so this is something for you to Google. Derek Redmond in 1992 was running, and I can't remember exactly which meter race it was, but he was running and he tore his hamstring. And I was actually watching, the Olympics that year live, and we'll never forget this image. He everybody else finishes the race. I don't even remember who won. And he's hobbling along, determined. I'm certainly not going to win, but I'm going to get over that finish line. Somebody comes running out of the stands and turns out to be his father. And he stands next to him. He walks alongside him, and people are coming over, they're trying to help. And his father is pushing them out of the way. Just get out of the way and let him finish. And to me, that is the image. When I think about what is it that we do? Well, we walk alongside. We're not doing the work for, and we're only doing what's asked of us. If Derek Redmond had said, "Dad, I don't want you here," I'm pretty sure his dad would have stepped back and let him go, just on his own. So Google that video and find that, when we're done. But also, when we're done, do some soul searching. Do a little homework and ask yourself, what's really at the heart of my reasons for doing what I do? And then, pick your own organization, the one that you work with, the one that you support, the one that you volunteer with. Read through the mission statement, the vision statement. Look at the language on the website and ask, who is at the center of the story? Are we affirming that survivors are at the center of their own stories, or does our language tell of a different motivation? Examine your message. So this goes hand in hand. The first part was about our own motivation. This part is about how do our messages affect the people that we serve. This might be an image that you're familiar with. It's called Migrant Mother. The photographer, a really famous documentarian named Dorothea Lange took this. And I'm going to read something that she said in 1960. She spoke about the photograph, and she said, "I saw an approach to the hungry and desperate mother as if drawn by a magnet. I don't remember how I explained my presence or my camera, but I do remember that she asked me no questions. I made 5 exposures, working closer from the same direction. I did not ask her name or her history. She told me her age, that she was 32, and she said that they had been living on frozen vegetables from the surrounding fields and birds that the children had killed. She had just sold the tires from her car to buy food. There she sat with her children huddled around her and seemed to know that my pictures might help her. And so she helped me. There was sort of an equality about it, which is, listen, I mean, that's a story that would sell, right? And Dorothea Lange's image did make a difference. After it was published, the government sent food to these migrant farm working communities in California where this image was taken. Only that's actually not the story. This woman has a name, Florence Owens at the time, Florence Owens Thompson. At a later point, she was a widow who had 5 or 6 children. She was from Oklahoma. Her parents were both from the Cherokee Nation, and she and her husband, because there was no work, no opportunities in Oklahoma, they went west. And then her husband died, and she actually was not living in that community where this photo was taken. She was driving through with her children and her boyfriend at the time, and got a flat tire. So they pulled off, and her boyfriend and a couple of her kids went to town to try to get the tire fixed. So she happened to be there as this photographer was here, but that was not her story. And later, when she talked to a reporter, the words she used was that she felt exploited. And that's a word that I think we should all be able to relate to. The people that we serve, the men, the women, the boys, the girls, have been exploited. So what we don't want to do is, through our messaging and our attempts to help, we don't want to re-exploit. And again, this photograph got help. People sent, or the government sent food or money. Our donors they'll send money, they'll send help, but we have to ask ourselves if we're re-exploiting in the process. So the ethical practice, I would recommend, is never sacrifice a person's dignity for the sake of a good story, because how we tell stories matter. In this work, in this anti-trafficking space, we are shaping the narrative, and we are shaping the narrative for a broader audience, and helping people understand what this work is really about. You've seen this picture before. If I say to you, oh gosh, look at the duck with the really long bill, you'll see a duck. If I say to you, oh, look at that sweet rabbit with the really long ears, then you're going to see a rabbit. And so we often misrepresent the people that we try to serve. And we come up with these stories, and listen, the story of the perfect victim is much easier to raise funds with. It is. It's much easier to tell a story of, somebody who was snatched or taken, like that movie, or, the person who, and this does happen, it does, but the person who, was online and was lured in, by some guy who misrepresented himself. That's an easier story to tell than the girl who was a teenager and came from a difficult home and made some bad decisions, but then got stuck in those decisions and couldn't get out, which is equally a story of human trafficking, and equally a story of a crime and exploitation. It is easier to tell the stories of that, and also the images that were in these earlier pictures. All right, let me go back to them. I mean, what do you see here? I see a lot of white skin, but the reality of the work that we do is women and girls of color, particularly when we're talking about sex trafficking in the US, are disproportionately affected by this crime. But those are not always the images that we see represented. And I've heard, again, really well-meaning people in this work use the phrase when they're trying to explain, oh, it's not just something that happens over there. It's not just something that happens in other countries. It's something that happens here. I've heard them use the phrase, it's happening to our girls. And I would say, let's be real careful about that us versus them language, because it's not us versus them, it's us as humans. And I think it's pretty arrogant to think that if I grew up in the exact same situation, the exact same circumstances, that those same things might not have happened to me. Or let's be real, that I might not have made some of the same decisions that got me into difficult situations. More homework. This is 18 and a half minutes, I think. If you will Google TED Talk and then Chimamanda Adichie, she has a TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story. And her TED Talk really is focused on the way we see immigrant populations or the refugee crisis. I think that was during the refugee crisis in Europe when she was telling this. But she talks about how we create monoliths, and we create this image of a group that everybody's exactly the same. Their story is all the same. And she says, well, that's how you create a single story. You show people as one thing, as only one thing, and you show it over and over again. And then that's what they become. And so I would say in our messaging, is that what we're doing? Are we, and I know that we have to simplify, you've got 2 seconds for somebody to see your website or your social media post. And we're struggling to get people's attention sometimes, but when we overly simplify or sensationalize, or a combination of both, what we're doing is really harming the greater movement, because it is not simple, and it is complex, and it requires a complex approach and complex solutions. So let's ask ourselves, how are we helping to shape the broader narrative? And I think back to that question about, my donors want the simple, they want the sensational, they want to feel that adrenaline. And then I say, well, maybe it's several conversations over a period of time. We might not reshape it overnight, but can we step by step and piece by piece and phrase by phrase, can we change that narrative so that we're not oversimplifying and we're not creating really what's a false narrative? Some ethical practices: develop policies before you're facing a dilemma. Think about what images are we going to use? What words are we going to use? And are we going to say it's okay for a survivor who's 19 to get online and share her story and do a video because she feels excited and she feels empowered? Are we going to have in our policies that either we don't do that until somebody's either out of our program, so that they don't feel like they have to do this to receive services, or until they're a year out, 2 years out, because the 19-year-old who's excited about sharing a story is one day going to be a 25-year-old and a 30-year-old looking for a job. And that stuff stays online forever. So, when that employer is Googling her name, because we know that happens, and this video is what shows up, then she's going to be defined by that single story instead of the breadth and the depth of who she is as a person or who he is as a person. Create a messaging guide and print it and put it in a PDF and, give it to your board, give it to your staff, give it to the interns who are working, so that everybody is literally on the same page in terms of how do we communicate what we do, and importantly, how do we communicate that big why? How do we talk about our mission, our motivation, and what about images? The ones that I pulled in those earlier slides, it took about 45 seconds because I Googled images, human trafficking, and these are the ones that popped up. But we have to ask ourselves, is this helping to shape the broader narrative in a healthy way? Because these hands tied by a rope are telling people that if we can just break down those locked doors and, rescue, which is a phrase that I would highly encourage us not to use, but if we can just break down that door, then, the men and the women and the boys and the girls who are experiencing human trafficking, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, they'll be free. The reality is there's trauma bonding. The reality is the psychological quote unquote chains are so much stronger than any physical chains. And so the reality is the women that I worked with, the women that I have worked with, both in Baltimore and in India and in other places, around the world and in the US, they had the courage to walk away. And that's the reality. They are the heroes in the story. And we're there, really just to walk alongside. In everything we do, the number one practice, if we're talking about ethical advocacy, is to use a survivor-centered, or better yet, a survivor-led approach. If you're talking about creating messaging, are survivors there at the table? Are they speaking into the language that's being used? Are they there to say, no, that's not how we want to be represented? In the very least, before you press play, before you hit publish, are you getting some feedback on the language, on the images, on the overall story that you're telling? These are a few resources. And what I will do at the end is go back and I can pull this up, or pull out your phone and take a picture of it real quick. And look up some of these resources. There's some good ones out there that give some real practical guidelines. And then in the 4 minutes we have left, I'm going to breeze through, examine your method, how you do the work that you do, because good intentions are not enough. They're not enough, and they can be really, really harmful. Again, back to when I was in Haiti, we did not ask for people to send things. We asked for money so that we could purchase the supplies that were needed, but people sent things anyway. I was with a faith-based organization, and there were some really well-meaning people, but they sent stuff, and we had to spend a lot of money to get stuff out of customs, and a lot of time to get things out. And in fairness, some of this stuff was useful, but we got a lot of this microwave popcorn, which was, not helpful, especially for people who even before the earthquake didn't have the electrical infrastructure to have microwaves. So that, wound up kind of being a funny story that we would tell. But in this work, in the anti-trafficking space, it's a lot more serious than, microwave popcorn. There's a guy named David Myers who used to work with FEMA and the Office for like faith-based partnerships. And I love this, that he said, if all you have going for you, and he was really pointing a finger at those of us in the faith-based space, if all you have going for you is a prayer and a song, you're just going to intensify the trauma. So turn your passion into hard work, do the research, ask the questions, pull in survivors, and ask those questions, and be really open to saying, I don't know what I don't know. Man, I wish this video would work. It's for like an animal rescue organization, and it's the cutest cats you've ever seen, like doing little human voices. And I got to tell you, when I watched it, when I saw it, I wanted to run to the nearest animal rescue organization and get a cat, because they were so cute. And then I remembered, oh, I'm allergic to cats. I don't really like cats. My house is not at all set up for cats. And if I brought a cat into my house, it would be a real detriment to that cat. And I think it's not hard to get people to care. It's not hard to get people to care about anti-trafficking work, because even without the sensationalizing, it's hard stories to hear. It's hard stories to hear, and you would have to be really callous to hear those stories and not to want to do something. But you have to consider, is the work that I'm doing the best? Is it the thing that's going to actually meet that need? And so again, I'll, in this 1 minute, assess the actual needs. Does somebody need what you have, or do they need something different? I worked with a young woman who, there were so many people, it was a few different organizations helping, and they were talking about, let's get her driving lessons, let's get her the GED, let's help her, get a job. Money was a real need of hers. But in a conversation with her, I discovered her mother was still claiming her on her taxes. This girl was 18, but she was independent. And so I thought, well, maybe what we could do is help her learn how to file her own taxes so that she could get that tax benefit herself. But that was not the need that in this swirl of service providers who are trying to help, it's not the thing that was top of mind. But when we stopped and asked some questions and let other people talk, sometimes the needs come up that we weren't thinking of. Again, survivor-centered approach, always, always, always. And look inward, do your own hard work. Are there biases? Again, I'm a white middle-aged woman. I don't look like a lot of the survivors, or most of the survivors that I worked with. Are there biases there that I'm not aware of? Is there implicit racism in the organization, in the way that we promote leadership, in the way that we gather voices together? Those are hard questions to ask, and it doesn't feel good to have to do that inner work. But you know what? It doesn't feel good to be a trauma survivor who's having to work through all that either. So use a collaborative approach. I have a coworker who is amazing, and she always says, not competition, but collaboration. We can't do this alone. We are all needed. It's big work. It's good work. It's hard work, but it's good work. And yeah, so my encouragement to all of us, and we're 2 minutes over, is keep doing the good work, and keep examining the way that, the way that you're doing it, the way that we're doing it. I love to talk about this stuff. If you want to email me, my work is Luthye B, so the Luthye, like my last name, B like Beth, at aramentafreedom.org. Yeah, and thank you so much for being here. I believe that the link will be posted at some point. So, but I'll stay on. I'll stop the recording, but I'll stay on with the chat if anybody has any questions. So,
Thank you so much, Beth, for